Hello and welcome back to our last lecture on chapter 13 on social psychology. We engage in prosocial behavior and in antisocial behavior. We do things that are good for other people, that are good for our social groups. That's called prosocial behavior. And then we do things that are harmful to other people or for other groups. And that's called antisocial behavior. And there are personal and social reasons why we do so. Maybe we help someone because we like them, or we help somebody because we're agreeable, nice people. We might help somebody because we are conforming with social norms about helping. And when we engage in aggression or antisocial behavior, that could be personal or group-based reasons for that. So actually, I'll ask you guys, what could be some personal reasons that people engage in antisocial behavior? No one has any thoughts this morning? Oh, yes, I see a few. Yeah, Phoenix has trauma. So maybe what they are doing is somehow part of a learned response. Trauma refers to bad things that can happen to us and leave a lasting psychological effect. Maybe we learn we're not safe, and that could result in aggression against others. As Liam and Grace said, maybe it's because they're having a bad day and getting frustrated. Yes, frustration does lead to aggression. You can think of frustration as frustration of your will, and aggression as a way of imposing your will. Catherine suggests mental illness factors like social anxiety. Fassian's comment about abuse, I think, is similar to trauma. Or maybe the person is an abusive person. Maybe they are a psychopath, and that's why they engage in antisocial behavior. So those are some personal reasons. Could there be any social reasons, group-based reasons that are outside of the individual themselves, that a person could engage in antisocial behavior? Hurting other people or hurting other groups? Yeah, Fassian's got a good one, like racism, discrimination. So people from majority ethnic groups often act in ways that are harmful to people from minority ethnic groups that they see as competing for resources in some way. Grace suggests a conformity effect. Your friends don't like someone, so you act negatively towards the person they don't like. See a lot of that in social bullying, when people start to gang up on someone just because they are disliked by a manager or a popular person. And even though the person that is being aggressed on hasn't done anything to harm all these other people, yet all these other folks are ganging up because it's what the group is doing, it's what the dominant person wants. Phoenix suggests another conformity or obedience pressure as religious beliefs. Sure. I certainly see LGBT folks being mistreated for religious reasons. So good job. So we do both, and they can be explained, attributed to both personal and situational factors. But since this is a unit on social psychology, we'll talk about the situational factors. Sometimes we help other people, and sometimes we don't. Researchers studying the Kitty Genovese case wondered why sometimes we would help and sometimes we wouldn't. This is a famous case that happened in the United States. And here you have a young white woman. This is very shocking because typically when young white women are in trouble, they get lots of help. She was stabbed in the street in a dense neighborhood. She was screaming And lots of people heard her screaming. Nobody helped. There are many other cases like that. Your textbook mentions somebody being murdered on a bridge, and the murderer just sort of waving around with the body, and people just kept driving past. So terrible things can happen to you in front of crowds that might just all keep passing by. Why might that be? How could something like that happen? It's not racism. So Grace suggests that everyone thinks that somebody else will help, and what Grace is referring to there is the diffusion of responsibility. So if you don't feel personally responsible for acting, like you might if you were a care provider that was, or a police officer that was off duty, might be those folks are more likely to help. They have more of a feeling of personal responsibility. But if you're just someone in the crowd and you're like, oh, what do I know about this? What can I do? And you can just slip past and keep going. And so you do that, but everyone else does too. Phoenix says they may be afraid of what happens to them if they try to intervene. Sure. Yeah, there could be self-interest there. I'm like, let's just not get involved in that. Good answers. So researchers in social psychology became very interested in this case. It's baffled people why she wasn't helped. And they did experiments where it set up different situations, and where there'd be like a confederate, a participant in the study, somebody working for the researchers. It's not a real situation. Somebody who looked like they needed help, and then the researchers would study the various factors under which people would help or would not help. And they found that, if people are rushed, they're less likely to help. People in a good mood, they're more likely to help. We've already brought up diffusion of responsibility, which is what Grace suggested. And then you might also question yourself and think, I don't think this is a real emergency. You might think, oh, it's just teenagers screaming. Actually, I hear screams in my neighborhood, and I don't do anything about it because I assume it's just students. There are a lot of Dal students in my neighborhood. I just figured, Dal students being Dal students. So if you think, could it be an emergency, you might question yourself, and you might assume that you're the only one that thinks it could be something real, and that's called pluralistic ignorance. You might assume that nobody else in the group sees the potential danger that you're considering, that it's just you, and then so dismiss it. This graph here is pretty dramatic results. About whether how likely people are to help when other people are around. So let's say there's some emergency situation and you're the only one there. Well, you're much more likely to help than if there's other people around, because then, maybe you don't want to get involved. Maybe you don't really know what's going on. It could be someone else's job. Much less likely to help when there's other people in the group. So what does that mean for the person who is experiencing the emergency? Well, it could be bad for them if everybody steps away, if everybody assumes that somebody else is going to handle it. So if you're going to have an emergency, you might be safer having it around fewer people than around a crowd of people. all of whom would not feel responsible. This is quite a dramatic effect, though. Look at the size of those differences. Here is another group effect on social behavior that you might have noticed. Sometimes some A students really hate group work, and they would rather write that term paper by themselves than have to deal with the group, because everyone in that group or other people in that group might probably don't feel as responsible. And there's a tendency for people to slack off a bit in groups when there's a bunch of people working on a task, and when it's not just you, well, you can expend less effort. And this has been demonstrated quite conclusively in experiments where, let's say, they ask people to yell as loud as they can alone or in a group, and the volume is definitely higher when they're alone. And as a consequence of this, the whole is less than the sum of its parts. And this could be due to diffusion of responsibility. Might be thinking, okay, I don't have to do as much because somebody else can do the work. Often that ends up being the A student that's really anal about getting a good grade. Right? They would take that responsibility. How can you manage that problem? And it's a real problem in academia. There are situations of group papers where there'll be somebody in a group that does like absolutely nothing. Maybe they just show up for the day of the presentation and they end up getting the same grade as everyone else. And that irritates the students that do the work. One way to deal with that problem is accountability. It's to make sure that every person in the group is assigned some piece of work, and they know what that is, and the group knows what that is, and they're accountable for it. Right? So you do A does X, B does Y, C does Z, and we're all going to meet on a certain date to share what we've done. And that way nobody can be in a position where somebody else will do their work. Altruism refers to helping other people selflessly. It is related to empathy. Empathy is a bit like compassion. The word passion, the noun passion, means suffering. And if you have suffered, if you have endured a passion, you're more likely to have compassion for somebody else who you see enduring the same kind of thing. More likely to have empathy for them. So your empathy is connected to your own pain. That's how you understand their pain. There are situational influences that impact whether or not we help. When you're the only one there, right? You can't get out of it. When we're feeling happier, when we have more time. And then there are characteristics of the victim that influence people's likelihood to help. What do you think those might be? What do you think these might be? Characteristics of the victim. Are there some people that were more likely to help and some people that were less likely to help? So maybe if they seem, I think Phoenix who wrote, they seem timid rather than aggressive. I suspect that's likely to be true. If somebody seems aggressive or out of control or dangerous, you might be less likely to help them. I'll buy that. Facienne says kind, shy. I'll buy it. What about other demographic factors? What about gender? What about race? Liam's on it. People are more likely to help a woman. There is a social norm about helping women. There's a social norm about helping people that we see as depending on us. So let's say helping children, helping patients, helping students. So that can put men in a tough spot. When I'm walking down Spring Garden Road in Halifax, a lot of the people I see panhandling on the street they look like they're men with disabilities. And who's helping them? The sort of social norm is that men are supposed to take care of other people. They're supposed to be strong and able. And now here's a guy that, because of maybe physical or mental disability, isn't able to hold down a job, isn't able to pull down the bill to pay the bills. Who's helping him? Liam suggests maybe someone of the same ethnicity. I suspect that's true. People who look like they deserve it, like very young or very old, right? Seems deserving. Seems polite, someone in their right mind. I agree. So yeah, Noah's also mentions that people are more likely to help out women than men. That's true. And men are also a bit more likely to help than women. Your textbook mentions an enlightenment effect. I thought that was kind of cool. Basically, if you tell people about this, if you teach people about these phenomena, these observations, this research, it actually makes them a bit more likely to help. Liam says people also assume that women are more innocent, right? If she asks for money, it's because she needs it, but they might assume that if it's a man, it's for drugs. I wonder. That's a hypothesis, testable hypothesis. Aggression. I'm on to aggression. Aggression is an interesting concept. The textbook defines it as behavior that is intended to harm, either physically or verbally. I'll add that it can also be relationally. And there's things that make us more likely to engage in aggression, like provocation, frustration. Media that models aggression seems to get people to engage in more aggression. Alcohol that shuts down the frontal lobe a bit, so people's inhibitions are reduced. They're more likely to engage in aggression. Hot temperatures, all these things. But let's go back to the definition of aggression, because it looks very objective and sort of scientific. And what I find interesting about this is that there is some social construction here in the idea of aggression, and it isn't immediately apparent. We would think that somebody punching an old lady is aggression, that road rage is aggression. We would think that genocide is aggression. Can you think of any examples where someone is being harmed physically, verbally, or socially, and we don't think of it as aggression? What I think is hidden in this hidden in the definition, the hidden assumption, is that the target of the aggression is somebody worthy that shouldn't be harmed. Oh, Noah has an interesting point. Isolating others. Yeah, we might not think of social the ways that we harm people socially, like social bullying or relational aggression as aggression. It passes more easily under the radar. And it's interesting that their definition actually leaves out relational aggression. It is a form of aggression. Relational aggression is like malicious gossip, rumor spreading, excluding somebody, getting other people to exclude somebody. Women are a bit more likely to engage in it. From what I saw, the prevalence rates, it was like a 60-40 thing, 60% women perpetrating and 40% male. And there you go, Liam. Liam's getting at the social construction. So when our soldiers are fighting in a war, they are defending the homeland, and they're not killing people. They are neutralizing enemy personnel. So we might have another way of seeing that doesn't label it as aggression. There are things we do that harm other people, other groups, other living beings that we don't see as aggressive. And he says police aren't seen as aggressive, even if they use excessive force. You know, they're just doing their job, right? They're just maintaining the law. It's just law enforcement. Good one, really good one. If you were a member of PETA, if you were an ethical vegan, you would be shocked at all the aggression against chickens and pigs and cows that just want to live their nice lives. Getting trucked to the slaughterhouse, getting butchered. But if you're somebody that's not vegan, that eats meats, well, you don't see it that way. You see it as kind of the meat version of harvesting a crop. When the state engages in executions, they don't see that as an act of aggression against the inmate. They see that as justice is being done. Justice has been served. So this idea of aggression there's a hidden assumption behind it that it's against a target and it's applied against a valued target. We value the target, and it's unjustifiable treatment. Is a parent that spanks the naughty child being aggressive? No, they're administering discipline. If we call something aggression and we say that's aggressive, there's a value judgment inherent in that it was sort of inappropriate and we value the mistreated target. Whether we engage in aggression or whether we engage in prosocial behavior is connected to our attitudes. Vegans have a totally different attitude toward chickens than do non-vegetarians. An attitude is a belief about something or someone that includes an emotional component. And emotions go back to values and value judgments. So it's like a belief about someone that's values-based, that has an emotional component, and it reflects a proclivity to treat them in a certain way. Attitudes are not the same thing as behavior. Behavior is observable action. You could have a negative attitude toward women, toward students, towards some group, and still treat them fairly. Because let's say you're in a system where the rules are very fair and you're just following the rules. You don't really like these people, but you're going to follow the rules and treat them as you're supposed to. There is a moderate correlation between attitudes and actual behaviors. I'd say 0.35 is pretty decent. And there are certain conditions where attitudes strongly correlate with behavior. There are weaker and stronger situations. In some situations, you don't have that much choice. There's a strong situation, and you do as the situation dictates, and then your attitudes don't matter as much. But in a really weak situation where you had a lot more freedom, then maybe personal traits, you'd expect that personal traits like attitudes would have a larger effect. And some attitudes can be very, very deeply ingrained, very stable. Let's say you're a person with very committed religious beliefs, and then though that would affect, let's say that gave you certain attitudes towards LGBT people, and we might expect that would come through in your behavior. And if you have like really strong, deeply held, consistent attitudes. So attitudes connect to our traits, our political beliefs, our religious beliefs, essentially to our values systems. Now, the correlation between attitudes and behavior is not perfect. It's like 0.35. That means that attitudes predict 0.35 times 0.35. I have to do that on my calculator. I know it's more than 9%, but less than 16. I'm calculating something called R squared, which is the percentage of variance explained. If I take the correlation coefficient, which is 0.35, and square it, that gives me 12.25, and that means that attitudes predict 12% of the variance in behavior, 12% of what's going on in behavior. That's something. But you can see that people are going to be engaging in a lot of behavior that's not a function of their attitudes. How does that make us feel? How do you feel when, because of a situation, because of conformity, because of obedience, because of whatever, you act in a way that is not consistent with your attitudes, that's not consistent with your values? Well, you could change your attitude. That's probably a lot easier than changing your behavior. So let's say in this example, you think of yourself as an honest person. You have values about honesty, but actually you cheated on your exam. Well, how are you going to come to terms with that? You can engage in some mental gymnastics to make yourself feel better. Right? You could say, well, maybe I'm not an honest person after all. This one's more threatening to your self-esteem. Change cognition B in this case sounds like it's sort of appealing. It's not, it's denial, and it's not really cheating. I just saw the answers. One that I get with students who use ChatGPT is that they're just using ChatGPT to get an idea. Right? They're not cheating. They were just getting ideas. And then you could also blame the test. Like, you had to cheat because the test was unfair, but really I'm an honest person. So there's different mental gymnastics you could do that reconcile the fact that your behavior was not consistent with your attitude. But notice that none of it involves like changing the behavior or going and like confessing and right, fessing up to it. They're all about changing the attitudes. How do we get our attitudes? Self-perception theory would say it's that, we observe our own behaviors and thereby acquire their attitudes. That I don't know. I have a harder time buying that because I feel like your behaviors should be predicted by your internal personal traits and be a function of your attitudes. I feel like don't the attitudes come first? But hey, maybe if they only predict 12% as a variance in behavior, they don't, and you could actually infer them from what you're doing. Many of these changes in attitudes that we see here are somehow about saving face, right? Blame the test. It's not really cheating. That doesn't count. It's cognition A here is the one that would cause you to lose face with yourself. And so impression management theory would suggest that we'd engage in we'd make reports about our attitudes that look good, that make us look good to others. One major subfield of social psychology is persuasion. So social psychology is about other people's effects on our behavior, how what we do reflects social forces. And there are other people in our environments who are trying to persuade us to do things. There are many applications of psychology to business in advertising. And let's say somebody wants to get you to buy a car. They could go and make a really strong rational appeal. They could explain to you all the benefits of this car and explain how it did in the consumer reports and compare it on, fuel efficiency and safety, etc., to other similar models, and thereby really win you over. And this works best when you actually have a good argument. And if you can get people's time and attention to attend to it, then you could really convince them, and you could even have like a lasting effect of persuasion. But often in life, you're trying to persuade people who do not really have the time to listen. And therefore, it's a lot faster and it's a lot easier and it's a lot more convenient to go through the peripheral route of persuasion and to appeal, let's say, to people's emotions. Maybe we will just pair this car with a beautiful woman and show you a photograph of the car and the beautiful woman, and maybe that could be enough to get you to buy the car. Advertisers try to do such things. While that kind of persuasion does work, if it didn't work, advertisers wouldn't do it. It doesn't lead to as lasting of a change in behavior or as effective persuasion as the central route appeal would. There are some famous persuasion techniques that your textbook elaborates on, And you have probably experienced some of these in your life. So the foot in the door technique breaks the ice with a small request. And once that has been achieved, once we have a crack, maybe we can push it open a little further and make a larger request that would be accepted. Would not have been accepted if we hadn't have gotten our foot in the door first. Can anyone think of an example of the foot in the door technique?
When I was younger in the Caribbean, I always used to tell my friends to ask my mom, let's, to go out so I can go out with them. So that
So you're getting your mother, you're getting your friends to ask your mom something. You think that's less of a big deal than if you were to ask. And then your mother says yes to that. And then what's your larger request?
once she gives me the permission to go, that's the basically that's the
Oh,
mission.
okay. That wouldn't be an example of the foot in the door technique. In that case, you used a more compelling pleader. Like she's more likely to say yes to the friend than to you. Foot in the door is when we start with something small. It's not too unreasonable, and we get the yes. And now once we've got the first yes, we're more likely to go on to a second yes to a bigger request. Liam suggests that somebody could ask for a small favor, and when somebody says yes, you kind of got them a bit. Then you can ask for a larger request, and it might be harder for them to say no because they've already said yes to the first thing. Here's an example. Sometimes people come around with petitions, and they just want you to sign your name on this petition for some cause. And it's a good cause, and it's this person that looks like they need help, and they're asking you, and you just need to sign your name and put your phone number down or your email address down. And it's hard to say no, right? And it really is such a small thing to sign this petition, and who cares about the petition anyway, right? I don't know that how much decision makers are influenced by petitions. But now you've given them a yes, you've done something. And so what you might expect to have happen next is that then they ask you, oh, would you give $5 to this cause? And well, now you've already signed the petition, and so you might go along with that. But let's say there was no petition and they just up cold, like immediately asked you for the $5 donation. Then you might say no. But they've kind of wormed their way in with the petition. So that's the foot in the door technique. The door in the face technique. Oh, wait, sorry, I saw something from Liam in the chat. So the cops start with the corrupt politicians and cops start with small favors, and they slowly get bigger and bigger. And then they move on. They use blackmail once they've done the first illegal things. Yeah, I'm thinking of some cases that would correspond with that, and I agree. So you get somebody to do something a little bit unethical, and now you come at them with more once they've started. And I think Stanley Milgram used this technique. You couldn't start off by asking people, hey, if this learner in the experiment gets something wrong, some simple memory question wrong, would you please give them a 450-volt shock that is lethal? No way. But you can start small. Just give them this little shock, right? Let's start at 15. Oh, that's fine. Well, now let's move to 30. Now let's move to 60. I think Milgram studies are an example of that. The door in the face technique is the opposite. So it starts with a big request, and people might say no to the big request because that's too much. And then in the second part, they ask for something smaller. And now the smaller request seems so much more reasonable that we're willing to say yes to it. But had they not made that first large request, we might not have said yes to the smaller request, because it created a comparison standard where it looks more reasonable. And Phoenix said, would catchy headlines be a door in the face technique? No, the catchy headline engages your interest and it makes you go look. Example of the door in the face technique might be like, you ask your mom to buy you a car because you need a car. And she's like, no. And then you say, okay, well, could I borrow the car on weekends? That's so much more affordable. That's so much more reasonable. Okay, yes, you can. That's an effective persuasion technique if you're more likely to get a yes to the smaller request after you made the large request than if you had just asked off the bat. Let's say that you asked your mom one day, can I borrow the car every weekend? Might just say no, because that now seems like a big unreasonable thing. But by asking something way bigger and way more unreasonable, like, will you please buy me a car? Now, when you present that request, all of a sudden it looks a lot more appealing and reasonable. Liam says, the door in the face method is fun. Start asking for 10 things, to which people say no way, and say, well, fine, can I have this one thing though? And then they say fine, even though that thing is not something they would have otherwise given you. That's it. That is the door in the face technique. And there's the lowball technique. This is when a salesperson sells you something with excellent value. Right? They're selling it below market price, but then they present you with all these desirable add-ons. And so you end up at the end of the day spending a lot of money. I think that movie theaters use this. When you buy a movie ticket, the theater isn't making a lot of money from that. The profit margin is pretty low. But now that you've got your movie ticket, is there anything else you're going to want to add on to that experience? Is just the ticket enough? Is that enough for your movie theater experience? No, you need to get the pop and you need to get the chips. You gotta have popcorn with butter when you go to the movie theater. Come on. And all these add-ons, those concessions, is actually where they make the money. Yeah, so the prices of the popcorn and the pop are like ridiculous. That's where the movie theater is making its profit. And those aren't things you have to buy. They're like add-ons to the experience. Jackson said, would the door in the face be like adding fake discounts to items at store to make it seem like the new price is more reasonable? When you go to Winners, they have a tag that says like, this is what the price should be, and it's like $100. That's the suggested retail price. And then Winners has this like slashed price that is so much lower. They're selling it to you for $50, but maybe the $50 is kind of unreasonable. But they just made it look reasonable by suggesting that you pay $100, right? That's the suggested retail price, and we're offering it for so much less. And now that looks like a good technique. That's door in the face. So yes, no, I think you are right. And then there's another really interesting technique, and I didn't know about this until I read the textbook, and then I thought, oh, my supervisor's done that to me. It's the but you're free technique. So somebody wants to convince you to do something, so they make their argument and they say, but it's really up to you, right? It's your choice, right? Like you're free to do whatever you want. For whatever reason, that makes people twice as likely to comply with a request. And I'm remembering times that's happened to me, and maybe it feels like the but you're free is a bit of a rejection, like, yeah, you can go off and do your own thing by yourself, or you could please me. Grace is coming back to the point about prices. Fake prices are illegal according to the marketing class. Does winners know that? 50% of their sales have to come from the initial price before they can legally cross it off and compare the discount to the old price. I'm glad there's a law for that, but I'm in a different province than you. I don't know if that's a provincial or a federal law. Back to the "but you are free" thing. Liam says it's something that manipulative people will do a lot. And it makes you think that they're really not manipulative because they're saying, but you're free. I think we're going to start using that. We are likely to imitate people who we admire, people who we see as high status. I was reading a history type book yesterday, and at one point, I think it was in Vienna in Austria, the princess, like the wife of the prince, had a limp after an illness. And then these society ladies started limping, and shoe stores started selling, well, they wouldn't have been shoe stores back in the day, but I guess cobblers were selling shoes with different heel heights so that you could actually acquire this limp. Nobody wants a limp for the sake of a limp, but it was associated with status and the beautiful, high-class, rich princess married to the prince. So she has a limp, you want one too. And so marketers will try to associate their products with celebrities and get celebrity endorsements. And maybe we think, if we use that product, then we'll be a bit more like those that we admire. It can cause a lot of trouble for these marketers when those celebrities go off and do something embarrassing. So Tiger Woods used to be advertising all kinds of stuff, and then there was some kind of sex scandal, and they didn't want anything more to do with him, which is one reason for using AI models. AI models will never embarrass you. The last section's on prejudice and discrimination. I can see from the fact that I'm on slide 49 and we have 4 minutes left that I'm going to go over time. However, I am taping, so if you need to leave at 12:20, please just carry on with the tape. Prejudice is about prejudging a person or a group. Prejudice, prejudge. So we don't have the evidence, but we're still going to judge them negative. We're still going to judge them. So actually, I'm going to revise what I said, because I said it was about negative judgments. It can also be about positive judgments. You can be prejudiced in favor of somebody as well. But the point is, it's not based on evidence. It may relate to stereotypes. We could have these really generalized beliefs about the characteristics of members of certain groups. Say, a stereotype is that women are more emotional. Stereotypes often have some basis in truth. Otherwise, we might not have them, but they're often unfair and they're often highly exaggerated. So there is an average difference in emotionality between men and women, but is it as great as the stereotype suggests? Well, probably not. And then there's also a lot of overlap in emotionality between gender groups, and it minimizes that overlap and suggests that there's just like uniform big differences. But really, you'll find some men that are more emotional than some women. So stereotypes may have some basis in truth, but they tend to be overgeneralized, and they also tend to make personal attributions. So if we think that X group is more likely to have criminal tendencies, and it's true that they actually have a higher crime rate, it doesn't tell us anything about the social determinants of crime or the social determinants of health, of well-being, for instance. So they can be unfair. Right? That's the ultimate attribution error. So attributing the negative behavior of some group entirely to their personal traits, like it's because they're lazy, it's because they're bad. Stereotypes are really common. They're like heuristics. They're generalizations that get us through our day. So we all have some prejudices. It is ultimately adaptive for us to favor our own groups and to be distrustful and disliking and wanting to exclude other groups because they are competing for our resources. So you could see how this trait has been selected for over the eons of human development. So we do tend to favor our own groups. We have biases that make us think our groups are better and other groups are worse. And while we are appreciative of the diversity in our own groups that we know, we tend to homogenize out-group members and downplay their individual differences and assume they're more like to each other and to the group average that is our stereotype. You could have an attitude and not translate it into behavior. You could be prejudiced against someone and not actually discriminate against them. But obviously, if you are prejudiced, you're more likely to discriminate. There's obviously a connection between the two. And discrimination is about treating out-group members differently from in-group members, disfavorably. So, an example, and discrimination can be legal or illegal. In Nova Scotia, it's legal to discriminate against people with criminal records and not give them jobs. Is that fair? A lot of people would say no, but it is legal, so that could be a legal form of discrimination. There's illegal discrimination and legal discrimination. Some of us believe that the world, the way it is fair. And that's more likely to be true if we're very privileged, because then it's in our interest to see things as fair, to think that those of us who lead and have the power are sort of chosen by God to do so, or we have better traits, we're more moral, we're more intelligent, and then those that have not, those that are suffering, well, it's because they are dumb and lazy and immoral, etc. That's the just world hypothesis, and it is associated with more prejudiced attitudes. Sometimes we're prejudiced because we're going along with other people's opinions, and our prejudice can serve us, right? If we can shift the blame for something onto another person or another group, usually it's one with lower power, then and we can scapegoating them, that could work for us. We can have prejudiced beliefs that we're not aware of. Most of us would say, oh, we're definitely not racist. There are tests that can measure unconscious bias, unconscious racism, and a very famous one is the implicit association test. You can go and take that yourself free online, and the implicit association test measures reaction time, and it basically wants to see if it's easier for you to associate, let's say, black faces with negative words than with positive words. Is it easier for you to pair white faces with like positive words? If we made you pair the black faces with positive words, would you be a little slower to hit that key? And could that reflect discrimination? There are some correlations between scores on the IAT and discriminatory behavior. However, it's quite controversial. Liam says a lot of stereotypes are based on generalizations. They also have their root in the availability heuristic. Yes, and so if a certain example is really available to us, then it might form part of a stereotype. And he gives the example every time, let's say a trans person does something bad, then everyone hears about it, and then it becomes part of the stereotype. I agree. There are some famous experiments called the Robbers Cave study. And in the Robbers Cave study, the experimenters randomly assigned suburban little boys to two different groups. They could be in the Eagles or the Rattlers. And the experimenters who took them to camp had them compete against each other. And guess what? They came to hate each other and taunt each other and raid each other's camps. And then the researchers tried to get them to like each other again. And this did not work. Like just going in and like to an assembly and telling them, you know, we should all be friends and we shouldn't bully each other and we shouldn't fight and we should like each other and let's not hurt other people. That basically didn't work. Mere exposure doesn't work. People keep judging and disliking each other and finding opportunities for conflict. The researcher, I think his name was Muzaffar Sharif, was finally able to get the groups to like each other. And what did he do? He made them have to work together on shared tasks that would benefit both groups. He got them to cooperate, and that made them like each other. This principles from that experiment were applied in jigsaw classrooms, which were used to try to minimize racial prejudice between students, especially after desegregation. And using these techniques, the educators were able to get kids from groups that previously didn't interact, that hated each other, to be playing with each other on the playground. Okay, they created problems for the kids to solve where each child had a different part of the puzzle. So everyone was needed in order to solve the group task. Everyone had to work together. There are conditions under which we can reduce this prejudice, like getting groups to cooperate towards shared goals. However, they require a lot of conditions that might actually not be really hard to implement in real life. In a classroom setting, the teachers who have the power can decide that the Black students and the white students are equals, right? Groups should be of roughly equal status. However, when you have prejudice and discrimination, oftentimes you do not have equal status groups. And do you have any kind of authority figure that can make them equal status? Like, can the UN do that? Probably not. So you can see that it may be more complicated, more difficult to do something like this in practice, and where you don't have a highly controlled environment where the leaders can create the shared goals and the shared projects and can create opportunities for enjoyable contact and can systemically create a situation where the different groups are equal. We are 6 minutes over time. Thank you for your patience. We are through chapter 13, and I look forward to starting chapter 14 on personality with you on Friday. Thank you for your patience.